What is your biggest I didn't think this through moment? At the top of a hill I'd only driven, I pointed my Fuji S12S downhill and pedaled hard to build speed to tackle the upcoming ascent. The hill turned as it descended. I crossed the center line, avoided an oncoming car, and then braked hard, but ran out of pavement. I went at nearly full speed into a telephone pole, breaking my back and leaving me permanently paralyzed. I've been in a wheelchair for over 32 years. My dad is a physician. He took my brother and I with him on a house call a while back. We'd been visiting family just down the road. The house was enormous. It belonged to the seer of some company that made pretzels, and she was one of his favorite patients. Anyways, this old woman, the seer, was all sorts of sick and dying, which is why my dad was making the house call. He goes up to check on her, and my brother and I are left alone in a room with her daughter. We are making small talk, being cordial, talking about the house, etc. She talks a lot about her job, her home, and where she lives, halfway across the country. Continuing with the polite conversation, I ask, so, what brings you to Florida? Her face drops, and she responds, oh, my mother is dying. I felt like such a shithead. Like, I fucking knew. I knew that's why she was here, and I still asked. I was sore from baseball practice, so I put Icy Hot on literally my entire body when I got home. Sat down watching TV when I realized I smelled of ass and bull sweat. So I went to take a hot shower. The second the water hit me, a screaming flurry of holy fucking shit reverberated throughout my neighborhood as I ran buck naked through my house. The worst part was I didn't know what to do. I was just running around nude, screaming like a little girl, and yelling profanities. I saw that my bike's handlebars and front tire were unaligned. Mid-ride, I decided to rectify this by kicking the front wheel, as I usually did while idle. My mind froze as I noticed the world was tilting towards me. I registered pain in my foot. Then it clicked, and I realized my foot was jammed in between the fork and the wheel as my shoe had caught on the tire. I went body first into the concrete and the bike landed on top of me, next to a busy highway. I have a couple. Mooned the freshman girls cross country team because I thought they were my group of friends running by. One of the girls was the coach's daughter. Bad idea. Insulting some kids when I was in middle school who were at least 5 feet bigger than me. I'm not a tall or smart man. Stealing another kid's homework, middle school again, and erasing his name badly and writing in my own. Using a deck full of level 3 and under monsters in a Yu-Gi-Oh duel when I was 13. I lost my only Egyptian god card in that duel because of my pride. Helping my friends through their breakup. Never do this. You will get shit from both sides. Masturbating before the bus came when I was 13. I missed the bus and got blue balls. My brother and I wanted a night out in town with some old school friends. It was a week before Christmas in 2010, and it had snowed very heavily and was bitterly cold outside. We waited at the bus stop as we both wanted a drink, but sure enough a car pulled over to inform us that buses weren't running. He offered us a lift 5 minutes up the road, which we accepted. After being dropped off, we decided to walk to town through the snow, knowing full well that it usually took just under an hour to get there by foot. We stopped to pick up a bottle of Jack from the off license for the journey and quickly set off. On the way there we ended up pushing several cars up hills and push a van around in the road. When we finally arrived at the bar in town, it had taken us close to 4 hours to get there. None of our friends turned up, but we stayed and had a drink anyway. 3 o'clock in the morning we stumble out of the dead bar and into the cold early morning air. We stood for a few seconds before I turned to my brother and asked, wait, how are we getting home? Only another 4-hour bloody walk. This is a friendly warning to others. Plan ahead. When I was a kid I saw a bungee jumping video and thought it was the craziest thing I've ever seen, so I had to do it. Next thing I know I was at a jungle gym with a piece of rope. I tied the rope to a pole at the top of the gym and then tied the other side around my waist, really fucking tight cause I thought I made the shittiest knots. When I jumped off I didn't bounce back. I just hung there for maybe 20 minutes with my full body weight digging into my stomach before some stranger ran over to save me. Now that I think of it, what I did didn't even resemble bungee jumping at all. childhood friend and I were having a bonfire in the backyard. We were about 11 or so and started throwing random stuff into the fire to see how it burned. One of the objects ending up in the fire was a cheap plastic skateboard. After it sat in there for a while, I began to smell the burning plastic and thought to myself, this is probably putting off noxious fumes. I pulled the board out of the fire and the label on the deck was ablaze, with the flame a few inches from my hand. In a panic I threw the board down, causing quasi-melted plastic to splatter off onto both of us. Fact, melted plastic attaches to the skin with a ferocity roughly equal to super glue and burns for several minutes before cooling. That sucked. I still have scars. I was 6 years old. I had tied a rope to the top of my father's forklift for swinging purposes. As per some commercial I saw, I decided to bite the rope and swing from my teeth. My 50 pounds immediately broke my upper jaw, making my front teeth stick out forward, perpendicular from my face. I didn't cry, I just hit the ground, covered my mouth, and ran to the bathroom. I did start screaming uncontrollably after I saw the blood pouring from between my fingers. My only memory after this is eating tomato soup on the floor and crying when the spoon grazed my out-poking teeth. The only lasting effect has been a neurosis about oral hygiene. In 2nd grade, I stole the class hamster. I really wanted a hamster. I just hung back and grabbed him when I was the last person in the room. I put him in my pocket on the bus ride home. He bit me a few times and chewed through the lining of my pocket. I did a lot of thinking about how I could explain it to my parents, and I decided to just act all excited and say I found a white mouse. It came out very quickly that it was not, in fact, some random white mouse. I remember saying that some kid on the bus, a mysterious redhead head smack, had given him to me. I don't remember the punishment, but I did get a real hamster at some point. A younger version of myself was, as I'm sure many of you were, an enthusiastic crafter of improvised ninja weapons. During junior high, it was ninja time, all the time. A certain portion of every day was devoted to wrecking the ceiling in the living room with bamboo stick twirling, and what I then imagined to be karate moves. The end of this phase came when my endeavor was to make a set of giant nunchucks in the Buster Sword tradition of weapon proportioning. Each shank was a 3-foot long section of 2-inch dowel with an eye bolt in each, connected with a bike chain. It did not occur to me at the time that this would make each shank longer than my arm. Predictably enough, after a series of figure eights that no doubt would have dazzled my would-be opponent, I attempted to arrest the arc by stopping the opposite end under my armpit. The shank was long enough that I caught the same end I was holding, allowing the free end to merrily complete its transit, smashing me in the back of the skull and laying me out in the gravel of the driveway. I'm glad this event predates YouTube. When I was 16, I finally got my own room in a new house we moved into. When I told all my friends, they seemed to be as excited as I was and asked if they could come over. I asked my mom and she said that it was okay. I was unpacking, admiring my room, and putting posters up. My friends weren't scheduled to be there for another 2 hours at least. When I had everything unpacked, and I was laying on my bed thinking that the room looked good, but I was missing something. And then I had the great idea, Christmas lights. I'll have the coolest room ever, I was thinking. So in a last minute attempt to impress my friends with these lights, I run into the basement and dig them out of the Christmas decorations. When I got back to my room, I began to staple them up around the perimeter of my ceiling. And now, the moment of truth. I turn the room light and flick the switch for the Christmas lights. I know they are blinking on and off at 3 different speeds, but there isn't a way to stop it. Now here comes the fucking brilliant idea. I don't know if it was all the movies and TV I watched, or that I was just a dumbass, but the wire the lights were on was split into 2 separate wired, and I thought, if I cut one of them, that the blinking would stop. I run to the kitchen and grab a steak knife and run back to my room. So, I'm standing there with the wires in my hand trying to decide which one to cut, like I'm disarming a bomb. When I finally make my decision and cut the wire, I remember seeing a bright blue flash. When I woke up, all the power in the house was off, and my mom was freaking out because she heard a crash. That was me hitting the floor, and the power went out at the same time. I was so afraid of getting in trouble I didn't tell her what happened and that I dropped something on the ground but didn't know why the power was out. I went to the washroom to splash some water on my face when I noticed in the mirror that my nose was bleeding. Also, I had a strong taste of copper in my mouth for some reason. I was spending spring break with my girlfriend's family at their lake house. Although we had been in our relationship for a while and most of the family liked me, I had never been able to be on the good side of her father no matter what. Deep down he just didn't care for me. One day when we were out to lunch with the whole family, including my GF's grandmother, there was a musician playing who was taking requests. I looked over the list and saw my favorite song of all time, Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye. I ran up, tipped the man a few dollars, requested the song, and sat back down. 2 minutes later, the musician starts playing my song. Bye-bye, I'm hot just like an oven. I need some lovin'. I thought. I didn't think this one through. This may not have been a good idea. Sitting there with my GF's mother, sister, grandmother, and father was now the longest 3 minutes of my life. Any possibility of a better relationship with her father had instantly been quashed. Probably somewhere around. You're my medicine. Open up and let me in. Darling, you're so great. I can't wait for you to operate. Not me, but a coworker. In high school I had this crappy job working in a shipping warehouse. We did lots of mailers to businesses, and we'd spend a lot of time packing boxes with promotional materials about the latest Mack truck, or whatever. Once, we had this mailer that consisted of a poster in a cardboard tube, a VHS video, a letter, and a high-gloss 4-color sheet, a keychain. Just a bunch of random stuff. You fit it all into this cardboard form and drop it on a conveyor. Then the shrink wrap dude puts it through the shrink wrap machine. And, well, shrink wraps it, as you'd expect. I'm working with this guy who's a few years older than me, Joe. He's known for being not the brightest bulb. So the first pallet of videos comes over, and he waves the forklift guy over to drop them next to us. Now the pallet has a bunch of boxes on it, and the entire thing is wrapped with a steel band under tension. You use these giant nippers to cut the band and stand back. B/C those things can be dangerous when they let go. He goes to cut it, and he's standing right in line with the band. This part happens in slow motion. I'm like, no, as he cuts it. Luckily, the band wasn't under that much tension. It just pops and lays there, and he's like, ha, dude, you freaked out. So I'm like, whatever, let's do this. So he goes to take down one of the boxes on top. This pallet was stacked high over our heads, and he's like, it's not coming free. So he starts pulling on it, trying to free it up, like it's stuck to another box or something, and he's pulling and pulling, and I see the whole stack rocking back and forth. I'm like, dude. So he stops, and he goes, and gets an office chair, with rolly wheels, and proceeds to stand on it, so he can get better leverage. Now he's teetering on this chair pulling and pulling, and I'm like, Joe, when that thing comes free. Just then it does. He just recovers his balance and hops down with it. I'm like, phew. So he goes, here, put this on the work table. I'll get the cardboard tubes, and he hands off the box. I look over at the work table, and there's no room. He had taken a big stack of high gloss sheets and stuck them right in the middle, leaving no room for the box. I don't want to set the box down on the floor, because our boss gets mad. If he ever sees anyone put anything more than a couple of pounds on the floor, then it has to be picked up, hurt back comp claim. So I'm like, Joe, can you push that stack over before you get the posters? Sure. He walks over to the stack, about 1.5 feet high, and he slaps his hands on either side near the bottom, presses in, and gives it a good hard push. His hands move back about 6 inches. The sheets stay put. He looks at me in shock. Slowly he brings his hands up to his face. You think you know a paper cut? Joe knows a paper cut. He's got a couple of 100 paper cuts along the entire surface of his palms and all over his fingers, densely packed. You know that saying, cut to ribbons? Well, he literally has dozens of little curlicues of razor thin bits of skin all over both hands. Underneath this is a whitish, moist looking layer of tissue, also sliced to bits, but just for a moment before this uniform ooze of blood from a million little capillaries promptly blankets the entire thing in red. It pools in another few seconds. It's running down both arms, He puts his hands flat and cups them, but it just wells up and starts streaming onto the warehouse floor. Then the pain. His face collapses into a wince, a simpering, helpless look at the sudden, sheer magnitude of the pain. If anyone's interested, I can also tell the story of when Joe and I were tasked with restacking pallets to accommodate the new shelving system. One of the worst moments in my life. My friends and I did the polar plunge to raise money for the Special Olympics. For those of you who don't know what this is, well, you jump into a freezing cold hole in the ice and swim across. Every year they encourage costumes to make the event more fun. Well, my brother, friend and I decided it would be awesome to go in our green man suits. The day of was amazing. Everyone was taking pictures with us and loved our costumes. When it came time for the jump, everyone was cheering and shouting like crazy. We made the jump, and one of the scariest moments of my life happened. We jumped into the freezing cold water and instantly our whole costume got soaked. The mask got wet, which made it dark and impossible to see. So we couldn't see where to get out of the water. This was just a prolonging of our agony. The worst part was that due to the wet mask, we couldn't breathe. It was like we were being waterboarded the whole time. It was too difficult to pull it away from your face and to take it off alone. So there we are, frozen, blind and gasping for air through drenched cloth. It took a minute or two before the people that were there for safety realized we couldn't see. They helped us, and our friend got his mask off with help, and knowing my brother and I were going through the same thing, he instantly ran over to help. I asked my parents if they could tell that we were waving at someone to help, and they said it just looked like we were cheering on the crowd, which in turn covered up our cries for help. Never had more of a I didn't think this through moment. Picture for some proof. TLDR jumped into freezing water in a morph suit, which led to blind, freezing, waterboarding-esque torture.